Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Slow Garden Center webinar on growing melons, cucumbers, squashes, and pumpkins. My name is Taylor Cochran, and our speaker today will be Dan Alexander with Jen Strobel Filming. To learn more about our upcoming events and our webinars, please visit our website, slowgardens.com, or visit any of our stores in the Bay Area. Now, I am excited to turn over to Dan and Jen to start talking about these cucurbits. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Taylor, and welcome everybody. We're going to talk about a big family of plants with worldwide distribution today. The cucurbits, or Cucurbitaceae is the name of the family to the botanists, and it includes cucumbers and squash and gourds and melons and has many different genuses in it and even more species. But there are really just 7 genera that have been cultivated by humans, and they have turned out to be extremely important to human nutrition. And in doing a little background reading, I was amazed to learn that squash has been cultivated and changed by humans for over 8,000 years, even predating corn and beans. Squash is a New World vegetable here in the Western Hemisphere. The squash and some of the gourds and pumpkins were exclusively New World plants. And then melons and cucumbers are Old World plants from Africa and Asia and the Middle East. And when the Columbian Exchange happened, they went both ways. And so the Spanish were here first, and they brought cucumbers and melons to our hemisphere. And then when they returned, they took squash and pumpkins and some of the gourds back to the rest of the world. And by the time other European explorers got into North America, the plants that the Spanish had brought to Mesoamerica had already made it up as far as southern Canada and were in cultivation there. So they ran into cucumbers, which they were familiar with, being cultivated by Native Americans before they even got there. So it's really a terrific family of plants. What they have in common is that they're annual growers, meaning they just grow during one season, and that's the summer. They're very frost sensitive, and they all require water fairly constantly. Except maybe right at the end, you can back off of the water as things ripen and concentrate the flavors a little bit. But they all are plants that require the constant uptake of water. They don't have any structures that hold water or woody tissues that can withstand getting dried out. And so, although that doesn't mean they need to be soggy at all, it means you have to water them real regularly throughout the summer here because we get no rain. There are types of gourds native to Africa that will grow in dry situations, but we don't have any of those that we commonly cultivate here. Well, first, I think we'll talk about the squashes because they're probably the most widely grown, and I suppose the very most widely grown are the zucchini types. And I have a little seed packet here that wonderfully has a whole blend of different types of summer squash. Summer squash is another name for basically zucchini types of squash. A summer squash, as opposed to a winter squash, is a squash that you eat when it's basically immature. So it has a soft skin and it doesn't store well. and so it grows in the summer and you eat it in the summer. A winter squash is a squash that you grow during the summer, but then allow to mature so it has a hard shell, like an acorn type squash or a Hubbard squash. And then they can store through at least part of the winter, so that you can eat them when in other parts or other times when vegetables were hard to come by during the winter. People stored squash so that they could get their vitamin C and vitamin A and that sort of thing during the winter when green vegetables generally weren't available to them. We don't quite have that problem around here anymore. So maybe we grow winter squash more as a novelty than as something that's required for winter cellar. The winter squash are kind of wonderful in that they're mostly vining squashes, which means they'll trail around through your garden. They can grow between other things or around other things, and they can even grow up, and you can if you have a hog wire fence or something like that, you can twine it up the hog wire fence and let the fruit develop there. If they're big fruit like a pumpkin or a Hubbard squash, you probably need to make a little sling out of an old dish towel or something to support it so it doesn't break the vine. But otherwise, they grow up just fine and take up less room on the ground. Most of the zucchini type squash, the summer squash, no matter what shape they are, whether they're long or the patty pans that are round, kind of flat and round like a flying saucer, or the round zucchini like Rome Denise, they all are more bush style in the way they grow. Some of them are a little viney, but I tend to lump them together as bush squash. So they don't take up as much highway as the winter squash do, but they're still big plants, and you have to give them plenty of room. They're also kind of, they have big leaves and they have a little bit spiny, not real super spiny like a rose bush, but a little bit spiny stems. And so you don't want to be constantly running into them and brushing them and that sort of thing. So it's good to give them quite a bit of room. My rule of thumb is 3 feet by 3 feet for a zucchini plant. That's a big area. Or if you're going to do it in a pot, a nice big pot. It's all right, Jen, I'll be right back. I'm bringing the pots over there.
Oh, I shouldn't follow you?
Oh, you can follow me. This is a good sized pot for a zucchini plant. If you've seen me do these things before, this is the same size pot I recommend for a tomato plant. It's nominally a 15-gallon container. It holds about 2 cubic feet of soil, and is just about the right size for a squash plant to grow in ultimately. This is a yellow crookneck squash, which is a type of zucchini, I would say. And there are actually 3, maybe even 4 plants in here. But one good healthy plant would fill this container right up with a squash plant. Or for that matter, a melon plant would need about this same root area in order to grow for the whole season and develop nicely. If you put them in a small container like this, they'll go for a while, but they'll run out of steam. And especially for pumpkins and winter squash, you need a long growing season, and we have that here. It's not a problem. But you want the plant to be healthy throughout the growing season and not to run out of soil and nutrients in a small container halfway through and then not able to really ripen the fruit for you. So go big, with the summer squash and the pumpkins especially, and the melons. Cucumbers, just segueing slightly, could grow in a smaller container. Cucumbers make a lighter vine, and they grow very well up on supports. You can use a tomato cage that's not being used for a tomato, or a teepee made of bamboo stakes, or again, a trellis or hog wire works great. And although most of the cucumbers make little tendrils, they're not very strong. So as it grows, weave it a little bit up the arbor, and it'll get better support that way. And you don't need to make a sling for the cucumbers. They're not heavy enough to break the vine. And you want to pick them, by the way, cucumbers when they're the normal cucumbers that we see in the store, straight 8 or market more. Pick them when they're relatively small. Don't ever let them get to the point where they start to turn yellow, because they're going to have big tough seeds in them, and the skin's going to be very thick, and they'll even lose flavor, get more bitter as they get older. So always pick your cucumbers a little on the young side, and you'll be happier with them. Don't hesitate to always pick off the big ones and get rid of them, because they're plants that if you leave fruit on them to ripen, they'll stop making new fruit. So you want to always clip off, even if they're too big to eat, clip them off and put them in your compost pile or green bin, but don't just leave them on there. And the same is true for, to some extent, with the zucchini. We all have, who've grown zucchini, have experienced the fact that we don't always see them all, and they're hidden under the leaves and that sort of thing. And we end up at some point with a zucchini that's this long and just big around, and we go, what am I going to do with that? And some people stuff them and do various things with them. I throw them away. I pick my zucchinis when they're very small and when they still have the flower on the end of them. And I find the flavors best, and they're very tender. And you can just eat them fresh right off the vine, or you can cook them very lightly, and they're just delicious. And by the time they get big, they start to get a little woody, and they develop, for me, a little gamey flavor that I don't appreciate. So I like to pick them very young, and that keeps them producing more and more.
You grow them in part sun or full sun?
Full sun, and you will experience during heat waves, if you have them out in the full sun, you'll notice that the plants will wilt even if the soil's moist. And that's real normal. That's a defense mechanism that the plants have to the heat, and they just don't bring up as much moisture, and you want to avoid watering plants that do that if the soil is moist. Don't water them when they're wilting from the heat like that, because that'll just push all the oxygen out from around the roots, and you'll have too much water in soil, and that can damage them. So you'll find that in the morning when you go out and look at them, they perk back up and they're just fine, because during the cool night they recharge themselves. And around here, when we have a 3 or 4 day heat wave, you can also shade them a little bit if you want to. It isn't really necessary, but if you're worried that they're getting too wilty, just shade them with a cardboard box or something like that. And this entire family has, for the most part, 2 different kinds of flowers. They have male flowers and female flowers. The female flowers make the fruit, and the male flowers just make pollen. And the pollen has to get from the male flower to the female flower, obviously. And that's generally done by bees. European honeybees will do it to some extent, but we in any area where these plants grew natively, there are native bees that have done that job for millennia. We call them squash bees, and there are two main species of bees that do that down here. And they're both a little bit bigger than a honeybee, kind of the size of a medium-sized bumblebee. And they have special structures on their legs to pick up the larger grains of pollen that the squash family has. And they do a real good job of pollinating them. They live in the ground, and they're solitary bees. You'll find the males will be buzzing around the flowers constantly, waiting for a female to come. The males don't do any of the pollinating. The females do all the pollinating, and the males are just waiting to mate with the female. And then the female takes the pollen and, of course, visits various flowers, and so moves the pollen from one to another. I guess they have evolved enough with the plants that they don't realize that the female flowers don't have pollen, or the female flowers must have something that attracts them, because all they're after is the pollen. And they happen to bring it from the male flowers to the female flowers. And then they take the pollen to their nest that they dig in the ground and make a ball out of it and lay an egg on it. And then their larva hatches out and eats the pollen and then turns into an adult and comes back in the summer when there are more squash around. So they're a wonderful part of the garden, and you can recognize them. They have longer antennae than the European honeybees. They're a little bigger, and they're very heavily striped in the abdomen. So they're your friends. And the most of these plants are too young to have, well, all of them are too young to have any flowers open. Squash flowers are large yellow flowers, and the male flowers usually open up first, so that the pollen is ready when the female flowers open up and want to be pollinated. Now it happens that we ran across this is called a lemon squash. It's kind of a round yellow summer squash, and it just happens that down here is a typical male flower with the long stem here, and then the flower is going to open up. But this is a female flower, and you can see the small squash-like structure here that's behind the flower, and the flower is going to open up. It'll get pollinated, and the pollen will fertilize the seeds, basically, that are inside the budding fruit here, and then the fruit will swell up, and the fruit is designed that it'll be eaten by something and then run through the gut and deposited somewhere with a nice pile of fertilizer and then grow. So you can tell the female flowers will always have kind of a bulbous structure at the base that is going to ultimately be the squash or the melon, the gourd, or even the cucumber that's going to ultimately grow. It's okay to pick and eat or fry the male flowers that come out first. If there are no female flowers visible on the plant, the male flowers aren't really good for anything, and they only last for a few days anyway. So go ahead and pick those and put them in your salad for decoration or to eat. They taste kind of fresh and a little bit cucumbery usually. And of course you can bread them and fry them and make them into an appetizer that way. That's quite interesting. But don't do that with the female flowers, because the plants basically need all the female flowers they can to make fruit. A little less critical in the summer squash, but in the vining squash and melons and pumpkins, you really don't want to waste any of those female flowers. You want them to make all the fruit that you can make. Now, the primary differences between growing squash on the one hand and melons or pumpkins on the other is the length of time that it takes to get the fruit. The summer squash is relatively quick. Within 70 days of transplanting one of these little guys out, you'll have zucchini squash and probably more than you can handle. But for a melon or a pumpkin, it's going to take 90 to even 120 days. And so that's quite a long season. And that's why we tend to see them in the fall, not in the middle of the summer. For pumpkins and winter squash, you just let them grow until the vines finally wither away, usually in October. And then cut them with leaving some stem, and then leave them out in the sun for a few days to kind of cure, and then you can store them if you're going to do that. Or if you're growing pumpkins, you can use the pumpkins for Halloween. Pumpkins come in a whole bunch of different styles, from the smaller, well, they're the little mini pumpkins, which are really a type of gourd, not a true pumpkin. But the sugar pumpkins, which are about this big, are great for making pie or cooking. And then the jack-o'-lantern pumpkins have a thinner wall relative to the size of the pumpkin, and more air inside, so great for jack-o'-lanterns. And pumpkins are great to grow with the kids, I think, and so are melons, even though you don't get a whole lot of them. They're really fun to watch develop, and a lot of lessons in biology can go on when you're talking about squash. Cucumbers are really best grown up. They tend to be a little brittle, so if they're on the ground, it's easy to break them, the vines, that is. And they also tend to acquire damage from snails and slugs and earwigs if they're laying in the ground. They grow very nicely up trellises and on little structures that you can make for them. And so I generally recommend that people do that. To me, it's a lot of work to build a structure that'll handle the heavy fruit, but cucumbers aren't a problem in that way at all. And so anything you've got that they can climb up or that you can attach them to will work great. And a vine can get 6 to 12 feet long without any problem if it's in a happy spot. The other nice thing is you can actually grow them where, maybe at the bottom it's shady, but as they grow up, they get into the sun. If you've got a spot like that, it's really perfect because that'll help cool the roots and keep it moist, but it'll get all the sun it needs as it grows up the fence or whatever it is that's getting it up into the air.
It'd be cool over an arbor with
They
all
work
the,
great over.
yeah. And
Yeah,
all the,
and then they'll hang down.
Hang
If
down.
it's got big, openings, the fruit can hang down
Yeah.
through the arbor. Very cool that way. We're getting in the nurseries, the growers are growing more of the long Japanese cucumber varieties than they used to. So we're not so much limited to the regular market type cucumbers anymore. We're getting varieties like unagi, which is about this long and very slender, and very tender. It's like a Persian cucumber, but longer and slimmer. Persian cucumbers are pretty available at the nurseries now. There are varieties like Diva, which is a hybrid Persian that's quite disease resistant and relatively easy to grow. So I think cucumbers haven't been the most popular things to grow, but I think more people should try them because they're really pretty easy to do and quite satisfying. And when you get a fresh one, it has a snap to it that you don't find in a lot of the ones you get at the grocery store that have been stored and waxed, and you know, they just don't have quite the pizzazz that one out of the garden has. And then there are the lemon cucumbers, which are the round yellow ones that have a little more tang to them. They're not tart like a lemon, but they're yellow, so they're called lemon cucumbers. But if you pick those when they're nice and young, don't wait till they kind of start to turn dark yellow. But pick them nice and young. They have a very thin skin. You don't have to peel them, and you can slice them into really nice looking bits to go in your salad or whatever. So lemon cucumbers are terrific.
Are the ones you get in the store, is that burpless cucumbers, or I never know?
Well, there are many kinds of burpless cucumbers. I think some are more burpless than others, but the ones that are the most burpless are grown in greenhouses, and they are they're parthenogenic. They don't need to be pollinized, and so they don't make seeds, except in very, very uncommon situations. And it's actually the seeds that are the source of the burpiness for the most part. So if you pick your cucumbers young, when the seeds are very soft and undeveloped, they're going to be less burpy. If you let them get older, they're going to be more burpy. And if you really want no burps, then you have to get the ones grown in the greenhouses that are usually wrapped in plastic and at the grocery store, and have really no seeds at all. So that's the story on that. I don't experience that reaction to cucumbers, so it has not been a problem for me, but I understand it is for some people. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, soil needs. These things grow fast and they grow big and they need pretty rich soil. So if you're going to grow them in the ground, you want to add plenty of organic matter to your soil. As I mentioned, basically a 3x3 area is a good rule of thumb to work for your squash or melons, and add a couple of inches of compost and some well composted manure, and then a little bit of fertilizer, maybe the famous E.V. Stone tomato and vegetable food would be good. As we've discussed with tomatoes quite a bit, you need calcium in the soil for squash as well, or it'll have the same problem that tomatoes can have, which is loss of end rot. That means that on the far end, the outer end of the fruit, you can get a kind of brown, black, squishy, moldy looking area, and it's from a lack of available calcium. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your soil is deficient in calcium, but it means the plant's not taking it up somehow. So I always think it's a good idea to make sure you've got some calcium in the soil, since we're not going to test for calcium, that's not easy to do. This fertilizer has about 3% calcium in it, which is fine, or you can use something like oyster shell. Oyster shell is readily available and ground very finely so that it will become available fairly quickly to the plants. Eggshells from your breakfast are okay in the long term to add calcium, but they don't do anything in the short term. So this year's eggshells put in the ground, or even put in your compost and then put in the ground, are not going to make available calcium for several years. So, you know, if you have a long-term vision and keep adding the eggshells over time, they'll add calcium, but they're not going to do it instantly. So you need something that's very, very, very finely ground to make it available. So add some fertilizer at the time of planting or working your soil bed, and that will assure that you've got nutrition down there and that you've got a source of calcium. Now, traditionally, if you're going to plant the seeds outside, and I put an array of seed packets out here. This is just, I mean, off of basically two different seed racks that we have here at the store. Some of the squash and pumpkins and melons that we have available. And this is, I didn't even pull the gourds. There are lots of gourd seeds too. I'll just pick one here. Let's see. Okay, I like this one. This is a red curry winter squash. It's a Japanese variety. I'm going to open it up. The seeds are fairly big and easy to deal with. If we can get them out.
Well, it's not too late to start seeds then, obviously.
No, not too late. I mean, May is, you don't want to try to grow squash before May around here. It's just too cold. But you can see these are, you know, they're big. They're like pumpkin seeds. Now, cucumber seeds are a little smaller and thinner, but they're all big enough to be manageable. And what I like to do is soak them overnight in water, and that helps hydrate them and sort of get the process started. And then if you're going to plant them directly outside, the traditional way is to make a hill for them. And I've made a mini hill over here in a pot so that you can kind of see what the process is. If I have a 3x3 area, I'm just going to take my trowel basically and dig a trench and move the soil from the trench up to make a hill. I've already made the hill here, but that's the process. And so I have a hill with a moat around it.
It's about 2 inches maybe tall, right?
It's about 2 inches tall, something like that. And then I've sort of patted down the area here where I'm going to put the seeds, and that leaves a lip so that when I water the seeds, the water will go down and keep the soil around the seeds wet. And I'm going to put the seeds down about 1 inch. They will have been soaked ideally, but here they're not. So I'm just going to push them down about 1 inch and let 3 of them grow, and then probably thin it to the strongest plant. And then I'm going to water here, and I'm going to water around the trench as well. And then after they've sprouted, I'm going to water only in the trench. And that way I won't be watering the foliage, because for the most part, watering the foliage on these plants is going to encourage fungal diseases of various kinds. Even though powdery mildew, for instance, can't grow in water, we splash
soil-borne spores up onto the leaves by watering the leaves. So if we keep the water gently pouring around in the moat instead, the hill will soak up the water for the roots and keep the water off the foliage. And we want to water in the morning so that even the soil surface is dry by evening. And that'll minimize the fungal problems that we have. That's the traditional way to start. If you're going to start them indoors or by starts like we have here, then it's a simple matter of catch some of the debris here. A simple matter of popping them out of the container and loosening the roots up a little bit. I'm just kind of scratching them up with my fingernails here, or as you know, I love this label tool to scratch things up with. And you want to be relatively gentle with the roots of squash plants. There's no need to go crazy with the soil loosening. But that's ready to transplant then, and I'll just use the same pot over here.
Yeah.
Even though we've got seeds going, I'm going to sacrifice them and pretend that we never made a hill here. And I can just make a little hole in my pot. Now, I've already mixed a healthy handful of the fertilizer into the soil here, so it's primed. And I want the top of my root ball here that I took out of the pot to be pretty much even with the top of the soil in the pot.
So you don't need a hill if it's already started.
No, if it's already started, there's no need for a hill whatsoever.
Okay.
The hill is really to warm the soil more than anything for the seeds. And because it's up in the air and the sun's shining on it, that little cone of soil is going to warm up faster than the soil that is down below it.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy's ready to go. I like to stake.
Hey Dan, I actually got two questions as you're
Okay.
this plant.
Yeah, fire away.
First off, could you talk again maybe about the soil mix that you're using, or just as a recommendation for what kind of soil they should pick up from our stores for this?
Yes, for containers, I'm using Slope Organic potting soil, the green bag over there. I find that texture-wise, it works really well. It seems to retain about the right amount of moisture. It's fairly fertile, although I do add fertilizer to it. And I think there are more expensive potting soils, but in my mind, I can add a little bit of fertilizer to this one and make it just about the same as the more expensive ones. So that's my go-to soil for growing most things, but especially vegetables. I also I've been partial recently to adding a little bit of biochar, which is charcoal basically, and worm castings, which have a kind of a very fine texture. These are kind of dry. They're not quite this fine when they're more moist. But I think that helps. Both of those help with the kinds of bacteria and fungi that you want growing in your soil. Plants don't grow in a vacuum in the soil, although obviously if you grow them hydroponically, you can do it. But in your soil, the plants are helped out by fungi and bacteria that are growing along with them. And I think the biochar
and earthworm casting combination helps that process. I don't add them for the most part to potting soils. If I find a potting soil that is working well, I figure they've done some experimentation and engineered it to be working, and I don't really want to be fiddling with it other than adding nutrition. So I tend to limit myself to adding fertilizer to a potting soil that I like. But if I'm working in the ground, then I like to add the biochar. You really only have to add once in your lifetime, and it just stays there. And the earthworm castings, I think, help the texture of the soil mostly, and they help feed the bacteria and fungi that you want growing.
Yeah, very nice. I definitely agree with that. I've been trying to use the biochar a little bit more recently. I do really like it a lot. And earthworm castings are a classic we've been using for a long time. And then one more thing about when you're planting them, I think when we were talking about tomatoes, we always talk about the idea that you can plant them deeper or higher, or all that kinds of stuff. Do cucumbers and all these different cucurbs have any problems with planting it deeper or any of that stuff?
Don't do it. Here's a real good example of how they sprout from the seeds. These big wide leaves at the bottom are the cotyledons, which were the basically the seed opened up, and these were the leaves immediately inside the seed coating, and you want those to stay above ground. It's not like tomatoes where it'll sprout more roots out of the stem. And in fact, you can see on this one that in the first joint, even before there are any true leaves, you're going to have a flower coming out there. So you really don't want to bury them deep. You'll probably get some stem rot if you bury them deeply, and you won't get any growth of new roots coming out of the stem. So just if you transplant, keep them at the same level that they were in the little pot that they came out of. That should be right at ground level in the ground or in the new pot. And when they sprout out of the ground, you'll be able to recognize them. Most seed packets have some kind of a picture drawing of what the seedling looks like, but they very quickly, in addition to having these big cotyledon leaves, they'll very quickly start to have their true leaves that will all have this kind of rounded, ruffly shape. The watermelons, interestingly, have more of a palmate shape with big lobes in the leaves. They're really quite attractive when they're winding around through your garden. But anyway, they're the ones that look a little different, and most of the others will be more or less heart-shaped with zigzags around the edges. And you'll be able to recognize them pretty easily as they sprout. They don't look like grassy weeds. They don't look like oxalis. They don't look like the typical things that we don't want growing with them. So you can pick out the weeds and leave the real McCoys.
Yeah, and can you actually grow them in the same bed with a tomato, or is that
Oh yeah, definitely. Now tomatoes weren't part of the Three Sisters way of growing things together. The squash was corn, and beans have been grown together in Mesoamerica for millennia, and the idea is that the beans grow up the corn stalks and the squash shades the ground around, and having the three different plants right together confuses the insect pests that are, they tend to want to identify the plant that they're interested in. And if you've got other things growing up with them, the idea is it confuses them, and then you have less in the way of pest problems. And of course, the beans are nitrogen fixers
So they will add nitrogen to the soil for the squash and corn. And the corn will act as a support for the beans. But you can certainly add tomatoes to that mix. Tomatoes grow just fine with all of those plants, and it's just that architecturally, it's a little hard to figure out where to work the tomatoes in.
Yeah.
You know, they're a viney plant too, and usually you want to support them, but they're not going to hang on to the corn plants, for instance. And it's very difficult to grow corn in the home garden, except as a demonstration plant for your children. You know, if everybody was growing corn in the neighborhood, even in just little bits, it would be helpful. But since the corn has to be wind pollinated, you need big bunches of pollen blowing around in the air to pollinate them. And every little kernel in the ear of corn needs a pollen grain on the silk to pollinate it, or it doesn't grow. So corn is not a practical thing to grow in our home gardens the way we live. So maybe the tomato cage could be the support for the beans, and then the squash can go around it. So that'll be our 3 brothers or sisters or whatever, modified a little bit. Let me talk just a little bit about pests and diseases. The biggest problem that all of us have with all of these plants is powdery mildew. Since it is ubiquitous in the area and it floats around through the air with the greatest of ease, it's going to happen. Traditionally, a spray made of either milk or bicarbonate of soda has been used as a prophylactic to keep it from growing, and they actually are a little bit effective. I don't recommend bicarbonate of soda because most plants find the salts to be toxic, and if you overdo it, you'll know it. You can use salts of potassium, and they're fairly effective. I don't think they're very available, but there might be I think we still have a product that is a potassium fungicide. But there are new fungicides, biologics, that are quite effective, and they're actually bacteria which apparently both use up the ecological niches that the fungi have to latch onto and help the plants with their natural resistance. And they are products like this Monterey Complete Disease Control, or there's a bonide equivalent called Revitalize, and it's unpronounceable Bacillus amifolica fasciana strain D747.
Yes.
But it's quite effective, and always fungicides are most effective as a prophylactic, but this is fairly effective even once you see a little bit of mildew. You got to get right at it. You can't just let it grow because it will spread and weaken the plant. But if it's on older leaves, pick them off and maybe spray the newer leaves. This is approved for organic gardening. It can be used right up to the day of harvest. So apparently it's a bacteria which is hard on the funguses, but not hard on us or the plants. And so I recommend that. There are also some chewing insects that can be a problem. There are squash bugs and cucumber beetles. Usually the cucumber beetles only more inland, so in Contra Costa County, maybe more of a problem than closer to the coast. But they usually only badly affect the really young plants. So sometimes it's a good idea to have some row cover, the white kind of lightweight. Usually people buy it for frost protection, but it works great as a row cover. And just put it over the very young plants. Sun and air and water can go through it just fine. But it keeps the bugs from flying in and laying their eggs, and their larvae eat the roots and that sort of thing. So usually not a huge problem, and usually not a huge problem in containers, more in the ground where they can overwinter and come back the following year. So, you know, keep your eye out for the mildew and try to keep on top of that. And that's the biggest problem that you're going to have. Let's see, what else? Any further questions, Taylor?
Yeah, wonderful talk so far. Lots of good information about these plants that are kind of on the somewhat trickier side, or at least people to get into. But once you get going, seem pretty fun and fast growing. I think talking a little bit more about the powdery mildew would be really helpful. It seems like that was the main question that many people actually were kind of talking about, was how do you deal with it, and what's actually the deal with it. And maybe if you could talk a little bit also about the idea you're saying we're picking up the leaves, but also talking about what thinning actually does and how that's useful for these kinds of plants.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, mildew is going to happen. And the main thing is to be keeping an eye out for it, and try to keep on top of it. Usually it's not right when they're tiny and young like these. They have to be bigger, and you'll usually see it on relatively big leaves. There isn't any here, but it would start to be kind of a whitish, grayish, fuzzy look. And when you first see it on a leaf, if it's a plant that's at least this big, I would just clip the leaf off and get rid of it. And then kind of see what happens a little bit. It's very weather related. And as I mentioned, it can't actually grow in water. So if you could keep the leaves constantly moist, you'd never have powdery mildew. You might have something else, but you wouldn't have powdery mildew. Well, that's not practical. We can't do that. And as I mentioned, splashing from the soil is one of the main ways that spores of all funguses are spread. So try to avoid that. If you can keep the leaves off the ground by staking your zucchini up, for instance, that'll help. I would say experiment with the bacteria. For instance, I have been trying it on some tomato plants that have had a fungal leaf spot, and what I'm trying to do is allow the plant to grow in spite of the fungus, keep the fungus limited to where it first appeared on the lower leaves, and picking off the bad leaves and then spraying the plant and trying to keep it from spreading. And so far, the experiment's working pretty well. The same thing can be done with the squash. It's a little bit more difficult in the rambling type of squash, because you're going to be following 20 feet of plant around with your little spray bottle, and it's hard to get underneath and get the stems, and they're on the ground anyway. So sunny, warm spot is number one. Ventilation is number two. Watering only in the morning would be number three. And then some kind of prophylactic measures if you want to take them. Milk actually works.
I've never heard that.
You put milk diluted about 4 to 1 with water. That's 4 times water, 1 part milk. in a spray bottle and spray the leaves with it, and it actually helps. You know, but again, when the plants start to get big, you end up spending a lot of time working your hand if you're going to do it that way. You could use a hose end sprayer and pour the milk in the hose end sprayer and do it that way. But my own, I guess, lazier way to do it is to keep an eye on it. When I first see it, pick off those leaves, use the spray a little bit, and try not to let the mildew get out of hand. The plants grow fast enough that they can grow faster than the mildew can spread, if you keep getting rid of the older leaves and leave at least half of the leaves on the plant, you'll be fine.
It doesn't affect the fruit, right? Or
It usually doesn't get on the fruit itself.
yeah.
Although I have seen it on there. And I've seen people who mistook the gray stripes on some of the zucchinis for mildew and got rid of all their fruit.
Oh no.
Yeah, gray zucchini is there are numerous varieties of gray zucchini that are very natural. And so don't mistake that. Powdery mildew is what you're looking at is the fruiting bodies of the fungus. They're like little mushrooms. And so they have texture and they'll rub off. The gray stuff on the skin of the zucchini won't rub off. So that's the first test. What am I dealing with? So, and then thinning, was that the second part of the question, Taylor?
Yeah, thinning, like what that maybe does to the plant or how we kind of use that.
Yeah, well, the idea is to plant more seeds than you need because you don't know exactly which seeds are going to be most viable or grow the strongest. And so you plant 3 or 4 seeds where you're only going to want 1 or 2 plants, and then you let them sprout, and then you judge which one's the strongest and thin out, which means kill the others, basically. You're culling and leaving the strongest plants to grow. And this is typically in a little pot that you buy, you'll have several, they'll have dropped several seeds in here already. And there are 3 growing here. And they're all looking pretty good, but I probably will want to thin this out to just 1 after I plant it and let them get established just a little bit. It's looking to me like the middle one here is probably going to be the strongest. This one is looking the weakest. There's subtle differences. They're not hugely different.
Could you split those up? Just split them and spread it out.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. At this point, you know, their roots are all sort of tangled up, and you could just kind of very gently separate them, but you're going to lose, you know, a fair amount of the roots to do that, which isn't the greatest idea. There's one, and that's still got a pretty good root system to it. And
Yeah, I think if you can catch it kind of early, you're able to do this.
I've got to do it when it's all pretty young and flexible, and these would probably each grow, and they all look pretty strong, so you could save a buck that way. But you know, if they get much bigger, if there were, like, these are quite a bit bigger looking, and this is a Lungo Florentino, which is a long zucchini. There we go. Yeah, you can see there's quite more root tangled up, and we probably would need to use an implement here and, cut between these in order to not tear the roots up. But it's doable.
Mhm.
And I know we're coming towards the end of the class, but I had one more main question that a couple of people asked about. Yeah, nice. Is some good watering tactics you use, especially people were asking about drip irrigation, which I'm not as familiar with how to give guidance on parts per emitter and stuff like that. But do you have any information on that?
Well, yeah, drip irrigation will work fine. If you're using a row method or a hill method, you want the equivalent of about an inch of water a week over the root zone. So if we're talking, a 3x3 area, that the problem with putting an emitter right next to the plant is the water goes down in a fairly narrow column. And you end up with only a small root area being watered. My suggestion would be several emitters so that you can keep a larger area watered, or maybe a bubbler rather than just a little tubular emitter where you can, build a little dike and flood the area so you're getting your inch of water, and it'll go down and evenly moisten the root zone that way. And the problem with drip irrigation is most people don't check it often enough to make sure that it's getting the water where it needs to go and getting enough water where it needs to go. Most of us either inherit a drip system and don't really know what it's made of, or we forget what we put out there, and we don't know how many gallons per hour the emitters are putting out, and we're not doing any calculating. We're just guessing. Oh, I'll run it for 15 minutes twice a week. That ought to be enough. Well, is it? The only way you can tell is to water, and then maybe the next day go out and dig around and figure out whether the water was going where you wanted it to go. You're safest supplementing your drip system with some hand watering, maybe every once a week or twice a month, something like that, so that things have gotten a good soak in a big enough area that they can have a decent sized root system. There's a real tension between conservation, obviously, and adequately watering to get good production. And drip is great for not causing a lot of evaporation because it's not wetting a huge surface area. And the surface is not important. The roots aren't on the surface. The water's got to get down, and it's got to get in a wide enough area that it can support a pretty good sized plant. And so if we think of this 2 cubic feet as being basically the root zone for a squash plant, it's got to be enough water to wet that whole area, and it's got to be delivered in a way that can do it fairly evenly. Just watering one little corner of the big pot isn't going to encourage good growth for the plant. So if I had a drip system for this container, I would have probably 3 emitters here to try to moisten the whole thing. And so if you translate that into the ground, you're going to be using a lot of emitters, or you're going to be using, I kind of like soaker hoses. You can coil them around areas, and you can bury them so that you don't have a lot of evaporation, and then they'll ooze out the water, and you can control them. the timing on them. So I think they're kind of a good solution. Just don't buy a soaker hose and then bring it back to the nursery and say, I got this hose and it leaks everywhere. I've had that happen.
Well, cool. Yeah, that's actually a lot of really good information about the irrigation, and hope that helps everyone when they're trying to figure out how much to water and how to water their plants. And I think also mentioning, like you said before, being careful not to splash too much water or be very aggressive with your watering, because that can cause a movement of spores, which was the earlier issue of powdery mildew. Yeah, and I was just looking through, and we, here and there, we have a couple of different kinds of questions about different kinds of bugs and different kinds of planting times and things like that. And although we don't have the time to talk about it today, I do want everyone to bring their samples into the stores. If you have a sample of a bug or a disease, put it in a plastic baggie, and you can bring it in, and we can talk to you about it. Or if we have the starts in our stores, like the zucchinis and all the squashes we have right now, if we're still selling them, it's still a good time to plant them. You can definitely talk to your local nursery people about your actual area, about what they're going to produce. And then Dan right now has some good books he wants to talk about really fast.
Real quick, Pam Pierce, Golden Gate Gardening, any edition. This is the latest 4th edition, which has a little more info for people over in Contra Costa, for instance. And this is one of my favorites, all new square foot gardening. It's Mel Bartholomew. This has wonderful ideas to help you visualize spacing and a lot of ideas about vertical growing. One of the hardest things is to figure out how close together to plant the different kinds of vegetables that you grow and that sort of thing. And Mel has done a very nice job of charting out how much space different kinds of plants need, and to help you maximize the amount of produce you can get from a given area. So I highly recommend it. And Pam's book is just sort of the Bible for growing all kinds of edibles in the Bay Area. It's exhaustive, encyclopedic, has some great recipes as well. And I strongly recommend it if you're going to be a vegetable gardener around here. So great resources.